Hello, welcome to Talk Story to Me. As I promised, this is my husband, James Fry.
Hi.
And he's going to join me for this review. And it's a little bit nerve-wracking this time because I don't have that comforting piece of paper covering the camera, so we can actually see ourselves. And it's a little bit horrifying for me, though. He's quite the handsome man, and I like him.
Thank you.
Anyway, enough of the lovey-doveys. We're now going to talk about Ghostbusters. There's really no need to tell you the plot at this point. You've probably heard it many, many times. There have been many reviews. The one thing that James and I both bring to this, though, that is a little bit unique is neither of us grew up watching Ghostbusters. In fact, we both watched it together for the first time when we had the flu, and we're stuck in bed.
Yes.
Very, very sick.
Of all the movies not to watch when you have the flu, I think we've crossed off 5 of them. Top 2 being Ghostbusters and UHF.
The fever might make it a little bit more interesting sometimes. But anyway, so we didn't grow up with that. And so it's not a sacred product for us. It's not one that's ruining our childhood. And both of us were just fine with the thought of it being remade as long as they gave it a good story. Let's see. As far as that goes, we're not going to be doing the how does it compare any more than we have to, and just, I think, maybe touch on that briefly, but we're not comparing them to the original characters or anything like that. Now, in terms of other biases, I'm annoyed with this movie, not because of the movie itself, but because of the way that Sony, and in particular how Paul Feig have been handling this situation, the way that certain misogynistic comments on YouTube have been taken out of context, and individuals such as the angry video game nerd James Rolfe have been unfairly maligned and treated horrifically, even making threats against their families. I do not appreciate the way that this movie has been politicized, and I do not appreciate the bullying on either sides. In fact, there are people on both sides who have ticked me off so much. We actually had no intention of going to see this movie at all, but after being offered the 4th set of free tickets, we finally decided, okay, let's go see it. And it kind of goes along with wanting to allow the art to stand free of the people who created it, since art's supposed to transcend the creator, but, you know, it gets harder sometimes, and maybe one day I'll figure out how that works. But I think that's the base of the biases. Do you have any other biases?
Basically, no. The only other, I guess, bias that you might have is that I look for, the acting and do the characters make sense. And I'm willing to enjoy, my threshold for suspending my disbelief isn't nearly as high as my wife's, so I'm more likely to enjoy a mediocre movie as long as it has something to keep my attention. And so basically, then looking for weird ways to keep my attention. I liked the Ghostbusters movie all right, but it wasn't that sacred, the defining movie of my childhood. So basically this is going to be an interesting one to review.
Alright, so we'll just kick it off and say, overall I felt like the movie was, it wasn't the worst movie ever, and if anyone tells you that it is, I kind of am inclined to say, well, how many bad movies have you seen? I mean, any more than I don't think Phantom Menace is the worst movie ever. But it's also not the best, and if this is what we're being given as strong female characters for women, I'm really annoyed because I think women deserve a lot better characters and better writing and better editing and better pacing and better character development.
I would say overall, this movie it's fun to look at. It's not really scary. It's more like watching a very well done ride at Universal Studios or an amusement park or Nickelodeon, something like that. There's a lot of fun. It goes out of its way, or almost appears like it's going out of its way, to tell you that this isn't real and that this is basically that this is a more of a ride.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it works to kind of pull you out of the real world, and other times it really didn't work. It didn't seem to make sense with the world they were establishing. Or one particular problem we'll get into more is when they're establishing their world, they have a few problems that kind of made it harder to suspend disbelief until the very end of the movie. End of the movie, though, was fantastic.
No. we can disagree. But,
exactly.
And actually, we often do. My issue with the movie is that it had a lot of potential to it all the way through. But in terms of the actual writing, it really, really lacked. And I feel like I might be repeating myself significantly on that. And part of it was tonally, it wasn't entirely sure what it wanted to be. They featured a lot of gross-out comedy. As been mentioned, the first couple jokes involved someone pooping his pants and a queefing joke, neither of which were particularly clever, and both of which were drawn out unnecessarily long. And the length that many of these pieces went, the problem was that it really made it apparent that we don't have a lot of substance on these characters. And the characters as bases were fine. I actually think that the actresses involved in this were one of the lesser problems. I mean, actually, I wouldn't say they were a problem at all.
No.
Yeah, they all did a pretty good job. The issue came in the writing, that very little is given about them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree. Starting off, you have what looks like the main character of the story, and then all of a sudden, after the opening credits, it switches over to you meet the rest of the group, and it was a little confusing at first to see whether the new characters were supposed to be the focal point or if it was the first character we looked at. Mm-hmm. Because on the one hand, from a story perspective, it looked like they were setting it up from the big picture for the one character to be sort of the cohesive glue, but she really wasn't. You could have almost taken her out of the story, and you put the focus on the other two characters you bring in later, and they're sort of the main glue anyway. Melissa McCarthy and not Kristen Wiig, but
Kate McKinnon?
Kate McKinnon, thank you. Yeah, Kate McKinnon. Those are the characters who are the glue of the Ghostbusters. Mm-hmm. Kristen Wiig's character felt like it could have been reoriented to have Melissa McCarthy be the intro character going to find Kristen Wiig's character and end up then bringing her in that way, and it would have avoided that little bit of a bump of, oh wait, hold on, I'm not sure where the story is going, and pulling you out of the world that you're supposed to be diving into, which is on the one hand very similar to and very different from our own.
And Kate McKinnon's character and Leslie Jones's were both very much characters that just they needed to be developed more. They had some good starts to them, and Leslie Jones got a little bit more development in terms of her past, though it wasn't explained why she decided to leave and join the Ghostbusters.
No, it wasn't. I didn't even know she had quit her job until one point late to the climax of the movie where she says, "Oh no, I quit my job." And I'm like, when did that happen? And why? Why would you quit your job? When did this happen? A little bit of help here, please, to understand what in the world just happened in the past 20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, the editing overall was lacking. But Kate McKinnon's character is one we get virtually nothing about her past or her connections, and there wasn't any reason not to, and instead we got jokes that just kept going and going even when they weren't funny, and we got some extended montage scenes, but it didn't really demonstrate the passage of time. It did not really show who they were, and it would have been so easy. I mean, these actresses really deserved a lot better than that. And hopefully, if they get a sequel for this, they'll flesh them out more, because quirks do not equal a character. Quirks are just an aspect of that. We get a little bit of history about Kristen Wiig's character and Melissa McCarthy's, but even that wasn't very consistent, which then leads to my other issue of this, is that it seemed like the movie was a vehicle for the jokes instead of the jokes being an aspect of the movie.
And the jokes could have worked within the characters. And Melissa McCarthy being the one going after the ghost, saying, like, this has been a passion of mine since I was a little girl, and I can't believe you're not as on board with it as I am. I found somebody else, other people who are willing to do this with me, but I really wanted you to do it with me. That was actually one of the things with Melissa McCarthy's character that could have used a little bit of work, is the character saying, I want something, or I feel this way. Instead, it was just, she was treating it like stand-up, which, granted, if that's the way it looked like it was written, in which case Melissa McCarthy did a great job keeping it from being as bad as it could have been.
Improv is a very difficult comedic form. It requires also in a movie that you have a director who knows when to say, okay, that went on just a little bit too long. For instance, one of the scenes where it felt more like stand-up more than character development is when she is, at first, when Kristen Wiig's character shows up, you hear Melissa McCarthy, oh, well, it's been so long, and it turns out, and you think at first she's talking to Kristen Wiig's character, then as it turns out she's actually talking to who she thinks is the delivery man. And, and there was some humor in there, don't get me wrong. There were shards of humor, but not a lot, and it was used to substitute actual character development and actual growth. And you can work in comedy when showing these characters and who they are, but like when there were these moments where she and Melissa McCarthy were about to, actually have a moment where the characters were advanced in some way, oftentimes it was used as a, hey, that's not what I meant, or, oh, you stupid person, how could you think that? There were often times when the comedy was inserted to the detriment of the characters. Another great example of that, product placement in this movie. There's one that, a joke and product placement both at the same time, where it derails the movie. I think this is an okay spoiler. I'm thinking of the Pringles.
Yes, the Pringles can. Yeah.
Yeah.
But where you could have taken what could have been a one-line joke, jump out real quick, jump back in, you're moving on with the story, it's fun, you got people laughing, but it's almost looked like the writers of the script, or it looked like they were anticipating laughs at that point, and so then they drew it out to give people time to laugh, and that style can work, but in the right format, in sitcom format. You put in a good joke and then a throwaway joke right after that to give the audience time to laugh so they don't miss anything. Unfortunately, when you do that for a big budget movie and you don't jump back into the story of what's going on, then that ends up causing some problems.
And the Pringles scene in particular, I'll just give you a little overview of it. It's when they're in the library, or in the haunted house, and right before that scene that you see in the previews where the ghost is vomiting ectoplasm on Kristen Wiig's character. And essentially, what happens leading up to that is it's very tense, and then suddenly you hear this crunch, crunch, and you turn around, and Kate McKinnon's character is shoving Pringles into her mouth. And says something about not being able to stop, and we couldn't catch what the other word was. And they cut to that a couple times, and see, that is a joke. First of all, the product placement was painful to the point of it just pushes the story off. There's some product placement that works. I didn't get some of the anger in the Man of Steel.
Right.
There's buildings, and even in this one, you have the Verizon building, which you can clearly see.
But if the buildings are there in your actual world, Verizon exists in this world, and it happens to be in an area where it's otherwise where it would be, then that's okay. That's actually very forgivable when you have something like that it would exist, and you can't just block over something generic, like you go into a bar and it just says beer on the wall. That's actually more distracting than if you had the actual product.
Yeah, whereas Kate McKinnon, it didn't make sense for her to suddenly be eating. Even though I appreciate having a woman eat on screen and it's not treated as a sexualized act or something to be hated.
Which they could have done, but thankfully they didn't.
Yes. But the fact is, we don't see her stuffing food in her mouth in the other climatic scenes or other scenes that are tense. So it's not really even a character twist. It was a joke at that time that I know they thought was funny, but it doesn't line up with the character, and that becomes very distracting.
Yeah. Now, we'll say it again, and we are harping on this maybe a lot, but just to be clear, yes, playing those strings. So basically, just to make clear that, again, these actresses did a phenomenal job of making the lines work the best that they could. It's just they weren't given as much as they needed to work with to really make it stand out. Anyway, moving on.
So, and there was that with a lot of the character, a lot of the jokes throughout were just that way. The pacing overall needed some work. The villain.
I probably shouldn't say too much about it because we don't want to give away too much.
Yeah, you know what? It's been a week. I'm not going to give away too much with this. But the fact is, okay, I love villains. The villain is usually my favorite part of the story. And I maintain you need a really good villain or a good antagonist to make this story work. And the fact was, this villain, first of all, it is the most awkward segue into a villain that I have ever seen. He shows up I leaned over to Jim and said, oh, please don't tell me that's the villain. Boom! It's the villain! It's the villain. And this poor guy, he's playing essentially the basement-dwelling nerd stereotype. And he even opens up with, I have been bullied, and soon I will bully others. There was something like that. It was like...
He starts hearing voices in his head, or talking to
I don't
himself,
know.
a demon, a ghost, It was a little hard to follow.
Okay, I have to... And moderate plus spoiler, but they saw it in the previews. If they've seen the previews, moderate spoiler here. He possesses Chris Hemsworth's body at one point. Spoiler. And suddenly has a complete personality change. Now, see, this is not a villain who we have... And actually, he was very entertaining as Chris Hemsworth, I will say that. Very flamboyant, very energetic, and interesting. But the problem was it didn't mesh with the villain that we had previously been presented, who is very staid, very...
It actually reminded me as if they were trying... It seemed like if they were trying to pull a... almost like the Trill from Star Trek The Next Generation, or Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where the Trill and the host merge together and form a new personality that's the combination of both. Here, isn't consistent with what we normally see in ghost possession, where the ghost's personality completely takes over and all you see is the ghost.
Yeah.
So that, a little bit of explanation on that point would have helped us enjoy the jokes more when the ghost is possessing Chris Hemsworth without wondering in the back of our minds, okay, we're not complaining, but how did we get from what we saw for 30 to 45 minutes of the movie to where we are now? And there's a lot of good stuff going on, but how did we get here?
Yeah. That is very problematic, and as initially the villain, he doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, it's not clear where he got this information from, and if we'd stayed out of his POV, that would be fine, because our ghost-busting team wouldn't necessarily know where he got this info from.
Well, no, they did explain that in the movie.
They got it from, that he took it out of their book, partially.
Right.
But why was he able to make it work? What motivated him? Aside from being bullied. It wasn't that it was completely passed over, but it was... He almost felt like a minion.
Right, but that, again, that's also the problem with creating a villain a lonely villain, because there's no mechanism to believably get that information to the audience.
Sure there is.
Well,
there's 1,000 ways we could do this.
You've got monologues talking to minions, or directly telling the heroes.
Monologuing.
Yeah, exactly.
When he was Chris Hemsworth, he could have at least given us a monologue. But no, we get a dance sequence and Peter panning.
Then again, all that stuff was a lot of fun, and basically led into the reasons why I think that the climax was fantastic, is that it gave us an enjoyable movie experience. Like, at the very end there, you've got building to the big thing. Oh no, the city and the world is in danger. We've got to go back and stop these ghosts from building up, and then coming through, and then having a fun climax that you remember. Actually, and this is one of the few points I'll contrast this with the original, is that the original, the climax was so sullen and so quiet for most of the climax, with the suspense they were trying to build, that it was very forgettable. Like, all I remember is the part about them crossing positronic streams. That's probably but with the original. But now in this one, you had the very visually interesting ghosts. You had lots of different colors, amazingly choreographed. Well, actually, it's amazing. Well choreographed fight scenes
there were some,
against the
particularly
ghost.
with Kate McKinnon's character.
Yes.
She starts the protons.
Exactly. One of the coolest things I've seen in a movie, probably in at least the past 6 months.
Well, that's not very high praise, baby. We've been watching mostly biopics and stuff like that.
You had to go and spoil it, didn't you? I was trying to be polite. I couldn't guarantee anything more than 6 months back. So, okay, you had ruined that way. No, all kidding aside, the scene did look amazing. My jaw almost hit the floor with that Kate McKinnon's fight scene going on. It is, hands down, one of the top 5 best scenes in the entire movie.
Yes.
It's worth a Redbox rental to see that scene alone.
It's a very good sequence. In fact, one of the things when we were discussing is that you could distill the movie down to like 15 to 20 minutes of really good stuff, of some really good comedy, of some great sequences. As far as the ending goes, I'm very mixed on that, because essentially, spoiler, skip ahead about 30 seconds if you don't want to hear this one, everything resets and there's no harm done. That really ruined it for me. And see, and there's nothing wrong with liking a bad movie or a not so good movie, but for me, it didn't have that special something to really pull me in and say, I love this in spite of it. I mean, I like some really bad movies, but this one, it didn't do that. And for me, and then the fact that the ghost battle, that there were so few ghosts attacking them. I thought we had centuries and centuries of ghosts about to burst through this ley line.
Not all of them may have been poised to enter New York City. Or wherever mythical city this is supposed to take place. I think it's in New York.
I think it's New York City.
Yeah. The same city that...
Well, it was so nice of them to coordinate so that there was only like one or two of each era.
Right, yeah, exactly.
I mean, that was great. And, you know, as far as
I could really overlook the fact that there were hundreds of Native Americans massacred on any given site that would be given by ghosts.
I don't remember there being any Native American ghosts there. Did you see? I can't remember now.
I thought I saw a couple being killed in the climax scene.
I don't remember. Anyway,
yeah.
So continuing on with that though, colors. I thought that's a really interesting point. The color scheme for this was pretty interesting, I think. A lot of people have said it looks like the Haunted House, which, yeah.
Or Haunted Mansion?
Oh, yes, Haunted Mansion.
Yes,
with what's his name? Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy, yes.
It's very vivid. It's very carnival-esque.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be very easy for places to mimic this look.
Right.
That does, for me, that detracts a little bit from the fear factor. I'm not as afraid of things that are in neon. I don't know if that says more about me or...
Well, Loki wasn't supposed to be a terrifying villain, so...
What? Loki wasn't wearing neons.
Neon green.
No, he wasn't.
Neon forest somewhere in that color spectrum.
That is not neon. That is emerald.
Okay, emerald, you got me. I can't see that color spectrum very well. Sue me.
Darling, this is a bright blue.
That's like more like an... Okay, yeah, that is a light blue.
See, when you've got colors like this...
Okay, yeah, this is like a neon green.
Yes, that's not what Loki was. Or like this. Or...
That's close to neon green.
Hold on. Or... like this.
Okay, that's definitely hot pink.
Yeah, when you have colors that are that bright, I just don't think it's quite as intimidating.
No, but then again, if you look at the first 20 minutes of the movie... Whoa. Yeah,
you okay?
Yeah, the camera went focused in and out. We went too far back.
Sorry.
Anyway, but yeah, the first 20 minutes of the movie set up, this wasn't going to be a horror suspense flick like a Prometheus or an Aliens or anything like that. This wasn't going to be that kind of a movie. This is going to be a fun, campy comedy that had some jokes and sort of an adventure pulling it along. And, of course, I ain't afraid of no ghosts.
Thank you, darling.
You're welcome.
Oh, my point is, it didn't bother me that much, but it did detract a little bit from the scariness for me. But that's more based on color theory, and apparently my husband is partially colorblind, but I still love him.
What are you going to do?
Who are you going to call? So, let's see. Oh, Chris Hemsworth was surprisingly...
Yes. The part, or one of the parts that had a lot of controversy going into this movie. Basically, switching out having Chris Hemsworth going from Thor to Secretary. And Chris Hemsworth as an actor showed that he can be himself and pull off a variety of characters all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. I still feel like some of the jokes went on a little bit too long, but he seemed to be having the time of his life.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly when he was being the villain. And now I will say I do actually want to see a movie. You're so sweet. Now I actually do want to see a movie with Chris Hemsworth as the villain. I think that would be a very interesting thing to see. But I want him to actually be evil and have good motivation and conviction and a lot of other things.
It's okay.
They ruined the villain.
Come here.
Good villain.
Not every villain can be perfect.
I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking.
Not any villain can be good.
Bad villain one. Anyway. Alright. So, let's see. Anything else we need to cut? Oh, yes, some of the jokes. I have to point out this one because it made me mad.
Oh,
Alright, some of the jokes were just wrong. And they were just in there to get...
Like, it wasn't even low-hanging fruit. Like,
it was like, there's no
off
fruit.
The ground, the rotten stuff.
There's no fruit! You just picked something that's not there. Like, at the end, Kristen Wiig's character has, dyed her hair, and it's Garfield orange. And then she says, it's not even named for the cat, it's named for the president. President Garfield had light brown hair, and they presented this as a joke.
Yeah, a better joke would have been, hey, I saw Bill Murray and wanted to dye my hair to remind him of another worse movie he could have been in. Maybe a little too meta, but you get what I'm saying. That there were other jokes that they could have used if they'd really wanted to change her hair color that badly.
Yeah, it was, and so it's just little things like that that tend to, they're like, eventually it really annoys people when you do this. But yes, there were some fun parts. Let's see if there was anything else that we needed to cover with this. We hit the writing, the pacing, the editing.
Yeah, let's see. Oh, the federal agents.
Oh.
Well, actually, no. That's sort of minor characters.
It kind of goes back to the writing. Most of
Right.
these things go back to the writing and stuff.
Yeah.
It looked like people were having a lot of fun in the movie, with the exception of Bill Murray. I don't think he didn't look like he was having a good time.
Right. Well, Dan Aykroyd is his. Well, okay. Spoiler.
No.
No. Okay.
Leave that one in.
All right. So anyway, see, where was it? Oh, where was it? Anyway, so yeah. Overall, again, this movie was a fun popcorn movie. It's one to take home or borrow off of somebody else who owns it. To sit down and just be able to completely enjoy some funny moments, and when you're in a state where you can overlook the rest of it, not have to think too hard.
And if you're like me, you won't enjoy it. You'll find a few parts, but you're going to be sitting like, why did you do that to a villain? Why didn't you give me a better character? Why aren't you answering my questions? Why did you not put more effort in the writing? Why is this getting turned into a movie when I have thousands of friends out there with better books?
Yes.
Better stories. And in principle, I'm not against reboots. I don't think any story is sacred to the point that it can't ever be retold. It can be fascinating to retell stories. And if they do another Ghostbusters movie...
Let's see. That... I'll have to see about... Yeah, I'll have to see. It depends on how they do the next movie, if it will garner enough attention.
Yeah, I think they're going to try. I don't know. I would like to see them develop the city. I think there's a lot of good ideas that are in there. And yeah, I guess this goes back to biases. I do tend to really look at story. That's a very important element to me. Story and character development. And crass humor doesn't do it for me. I tend to get annoyed because to me that's low-hanging fruit, and particularly when they drag jokes out, it gets on my nerves. It's not, a little bit's fine, I enjoy some, but like, please, just, you could have done so much more. So for me, it's if you liked the previews, if you laughed at the previews, and James laughed a little bit at some of the previews.
And yeah, a couple of scenes of the previews to this movie, or the movies that were shown before we saw Ghostbusters.
The previews to Ghostbusters, darling.
Yes, there were a few of them. Again, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't laugh at all when I saw the previews. I thought the previews looked pretty rough, but James did. So I think that if you saw the previews and you got a good chuckle out of those, or thought it looked pretty interesting, you're going to be more inclined to like it. I will say though that they put the worst sequences in the previews. Now, because it's funny.
Yeah, because there were a couple of scenes and jokes that were a little more awkward, but there were some other ones that were better than the ones that they had in the trailer.
Like, Leslie Jones's best moments were not in the trailer at all.
No, they weren't. It's
like
that was a good snapshot of Leslie Jones's character.
Well, no, I think she was better than what the trailer showed her to be. Anyway.
All right, not going to argue with you there.
Yeah. I will end on one thing that I did like with it though. One of the scenes that I enjoyed the most was actually a scene with Leslie Jones when they're at the concert, and she makes the comment about a nightmare room, and that joke is great, and it's also creepy. So that was there.
Yes,
there's some good elements in the movie. It's just it's not my cup of tea. But then again, I have weird cups of tea, so
yeah. And from just an enjoyable, from a character study, it doesn't make as much sense as you would want to from either a well-done character study with some humor in it, done that have come out, other ones that have come out recently. But if you're looking for just something fun, if you're yeah, just the Ghostbusters and cool special effects, bright colors shooting at stuff, and jokes along the way, then yeah, this is definitely one that you're going to enjoy.
All right. I think that's it. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you, sweetie. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Aww.